Welcome to the Drive-By Entrepreneur Podcast, which exists to bring current and compelling content to entrepreneurs and influencers of small to mid-sized organizations. I'm John Frank, fellow entrepreneur and the owner of Third Road Management. And with this podcast, we will connect with a variety of experienced and dynamic individuals to shed some light on both the art and science of entrepreneurship. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors. First, my very own Third Road Management, a company that brings fractional CFO services to small and mid-sized organizations by revolutionizing the CFO suite. We'd also like to thank Two Hound Red, a brewery and restaurant located in Glen Ellen, Illinois, that is focused on creating classic, innovative beer and food. And finally, we'd like to thank NWC Media, which provides inbound marketing technology, project workflow management, and efficiency consulting to organizations of varied sizes, who is also the producer of the Drive-By Entrepreneur Podcast. Bobby Kellman.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Really looking forward to this conversation. I'll get more into it here in a little while, but welcome, co-founder of Enclave. And I think you're going to share some really fun and exciting content for anybody that's tuning in here. So,
Hope so.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. So I like to start out, this is relatively new, right? So this is episode 8.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the podcast is called the Drive-By Entrepreneur Podcast by Third Road Management, which is my company. But the idea is to bring current and compelling content to entrepreneurs and influencers of small to mid-sized organizations. So, a little bit about my business and what we do. Generally speaking, we're trying to bring in entrepreneurs, subject matter experts, people with sort of like different views, with the idea in mind that you can educate, inspire, and in general, sort of like just bring ideas to the forefront that people would be like, oh, that's really interesting, or I can learn from that, or I can apply it to, my business or whatever it might be. So, so that's why we're here. Wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So, like I mentioned, co-founder of Enclave. But, in your own words, why don't you tell me a little bit about you, and, what brought you to co-founding the Enclave, and then what the Enclave is. And I think that will tee up sort of the rest of the conversation.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
So Bobby Kellman, co-founder of Enclave. Enclave is a shared workspace and lounge designed for suburban professionals who work from home.
Okay.
So we provide a third space for local residents, people who live in the suburb, to come downtown, have a space where they can go and work that is not in their home, away from the distractions, the kids, the dogs that might plague their work life at home, but still be local. No commutes, no hassle. So our slogan is work local, not at home, and that kind of brings everything in that somebody might find at Enclave. Got into the business, honestly, for the same reason I think a lot of entrepreneurs start businesses. I had a need. So I worked in tech for a long time, and always worked with and alongside founders. Always had an interest to do my own thing, have my own business. But it wasn't until I moved to the suburbs that I kind of dawned on me the opportunity. The team I was managing at the time was not in Chicago. So I was fully remote even before COVID made that popular.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved out to the suburbs, I quickly realized there was nowhere for me to go. The co-working spaces I'd grown to know and love in the city are really an urban phenomenon in this country. 90% of all co-working is in the cities. But twice the number of people live in the burbs, 4 times the amount of money is in the suburbs. So there really was kind of a product market gap. So we opened up the first Enclave to address that, give me a place to go work, and it's been off to the races ever since.
Very, very neat. Yeah, I found that interesting when you said that, because I think most people have this association with co-working space, like WeWork or
Mm-hmm.
things like that, I'm not an expert in this, and we'll go into this a little bit more. But there's also a lot of just like smaller community-based things within the city,
Hmm.
and I'm aware of a couple, now that people just don't know they're there, and in the suburbs, people don't know what they're missing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think people in the suburbs are kind of used, they move to the suburbs expecting to have to commute back into the city.
Hmm.
And that is it's no longer the case now with COVID. People work from home long enough where they want a local option. But the models that you see in the city, your WeWorks or Industrious, they don't match the suburban environment. They're
Hmm.
far too big, far too expensive, and they don't have kind of that under the foundation of tech that helps them operate much smaller locations in kind of in a sustainable manner. And so that's really where Enclave came in, is we've been able to leverage tech to run, I call them, micro spaces, less than 2,000 square
Hmm.
feet, right in your suburban downtown. Whereas, the closest WeWork is going to be 50,000 square feet.
Right.
And they'll rent out whole office, the floors even, to Microsoft and other big companies. Whereas we cater to people who work from home, the individuals who need a place 2, 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's a different model, all in the same family, of course, but a different model.
Yeah. You find that you have sort of the founder mindset. I mean, I know you worked for what was once a tech startup, now is a
A
Goliath
little bit bigger, yeah.
prior to doing this. But we talked a little bit about, you've got your law degree, but you don't
Hmm.
practice law. Um, you felt like you got to have the little pink umbrella idea eventually, kind of thing, or like what? I mean, like,
uh,
has that always been an itch just feel like you need to scratch with starting something, or
yeah, I think so. I think it probably went undefined for a while.
yeah,
I started, I don't know, Enclave was probably my sixth or seventh business.
okay,
A painting business in college. Like, these are not glamorous affairs. I think technically my first business was trying to scam neighbors out of money when I was 7 years old, kind of thing.
yeah,
So
right,
I was always into that. Um, I think founders have to uh, there is a mentality to founders. It's just sort of a willingness to always get things done.
yeah,
I don't think it's really any more complicated than that. Like, problems will arise. Usually the solution is easier than you think. You just have to be willing to fill the blank sheet of paper. And I think some people love that kind of challenge and some people don't. And one's not better than the other. It's just one leads you're more likely to sort of end up on that entrepreneurial path.
yep, absolutely agree, 100%. All right, very good. So usually I try to have some sort of themes. Um, we don't have to stick to exactly those themes,
Hmm.
but I try to like have some, a couple of areas that we want to double click on. And with you, I thought that there was two in particular that stood out to me. The first one being, you're on this venture capital journey, right? You're a founder, but whereas I, started the business, bootstrapped it, right? Used my own money to kind of
Hmm.
grow it, kind of thing, which has its advantages. Um, but the other direction, right, in terms of, that's restrictive in nature too. I mean, you can only go as far as, your
Yeah.
personal, finances will allow, right? Versus the other way of raising capital, right, to go try to take an idea and make it a much bigger idea. I think that that's a world that is largely unknown unless you're sort of like in it,
Hmm.
right? So I think it'll be good for people to, just kind of hear your perspective, not only as one that knows about the venture capital community, but also one that is currently like operating a business in it.
Hmm.
So I think that that's going to be fun to sort of lean into.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, it's come up numerous times now on just office space in general, remote working, things like that. On the podcast, we've been talking about it. And I think it'll just be really interesting to get your perspective on it because pretty much every business is sort of like wrestling with this
Yeah.
context. So, anyway, so I think it's going to be really, really fun. So, why don't we first hit on, venture capital, right? Like, and let's think of this as like venture capital 101, right? Like, so if somebody didn't know a ton about how that world works,
Hmm.
right? let's tap into that a little bit as if you were explaining it like it was a 5-year-old, right? So I guess start with you have an idea, right?
Hmm.
And how does the sequencing work? In your case, you had an idea, you started the Glen Ellen Enclave,
Hmm.
and then from there you've grown, and maybe use that as an illustration for how like a traditional venture capital backed company, gets to where it goes.
So traditional VC-backed companies, there's a founder or founding team that builds a prototype of some kind, and they show proof of concept.
Hmm.
And with that proof of concept, you can then go out and raise either, depending on what it is, if it's a software, pure tech play, sometimes you can go immediately to VCs and raise a seed round. Other times you take that proof of concept and you raise more of an angel round or friends and family round,
Right.
where you essentially, now you've got the proof of concept. So you've built your widget. Now you show with this angel and friends and family round that it has some market traction. Not a
Hmm.
lot, but at least that somebody might be willing to buy it. And then once you have those two things, the widget itself, the proof of the sorry, the slight bit of traction, you can take that story to VCs.
Okay.
And if the market is big enough, and that's really what your VCs are going to be looking for, like, is the potential here worth the VC investment? Because they have to make such an on their successful bets, they've got to make an extravagant amount. So they need to know the market size is there to justify all of it. Then they're likely to give. Um, there are certain fields that are going to be more popular at different times. Like right now, I think that Web3 was very popular, and then I'm not sure how the FTX thing changed that, but Web3 was very popular, um, and you get a lot of VC interest. But it's a lot of it is relationships.
Hmm.
Can you look a VC in the eye and convince them that you are the person who's going to build your business into something massive? Are you going to sort of give it all until you've won that field? At the earliest stages, they're betting more on you than they are even on the business.
Right. And are you going to sustain and see it through and
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff?
exactly. And you see a lot of very, very early investors in VCs. Their process is actually testing the founder. They'll put you through more than a few roller coasters, and it's more to see how you act under pressure than it is to even, again, test your particular business idea.
Hmm.
Um, with the Enclave, we in some ways got lucky. Myself, my co-founders, we put our money in. We opened up the Glen Ellen location, and we did meet with some immediate success. So the widget that we built was working, um, and we were able to talk to different people in the community who were actually interested in investing in our growth.
Hmm.
And I think in some ways that's unique to maybe Glen Ellen, Illinois.
Yeah.
We hit a home run. It was an accident on our part. We picked Glen Ellen because the location was good, the math worked, not because we knew this about the community. But with the community support, we were able to open three more. And it
Hmm.
was on the basis of the four locations that we had open that we were able to go to VCs and say, see, we have built our widget. We've proven people are willing to buy it. It's filling a market need. Here's the market potential. Do you want to help us grow even larger? And we were lucky enough to get a few yeses on that one.
Very good. Okay, so in your illustration here, or your real-time illustration, right? Would you say then that your friends and family or angel round was really sort of that, that group in
Yeah,
Glen Ellen where you had sort of planted the first location?
yeah.
Okay, got it.
So yeah, we didn't have friends and family in the literal sense.
Yeah.
We had our Glen Ellen family, and so they helped us raise essentially another $300,000, which paid for the additional three locations.
Yep.
Um, and then they did that by introducing us to other people in the community, some of whom wanted to be part of a startup.
Yep.
They just wanted to be along for the ride, knowing that maybe they lose everything.
Yep.
Um, some people actually believe deeply, deeply in this type of business. They'd lived in the suburbs long enough and knew that this was filling a need for them, and they figured that there were a lot of people just like them all across the country. Um, and then there were a couple quasi-institutional players, I would say, as part of that too. I think saw some potential in it, um, and that helped, I think, fill out our story a little bit.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a lot of customers. It's another thing to have another base of customers that is also investing in the company. And
Right.
I think when you can take that story to a venture capitalist, that's the kind of X factor they're looking for.
Hmm.
They talk to a lot of entrepreneurs every day. It's very hard to break through. And then even once you break through, you have to make sure you have that hook.
Yeah.
Why should they be interested? And it's almost as if you want to create this feeling that the train's leaving the station with or without them. So you want them to get on board.
Yeah.
Um, we had some help though. We actually ended up hiring a firm to help us out that would make introductions. Like everything in life, there's a lot of who you know.
Yeah.
And we didn't have, I come from tech, but I didn't know many VCs. And so getting through that initial like cold email to first meeting can be really challenging. And so the firm that we brought on, I mean, did amazing work, and really I think helped us they provided some validation for us. They vetted us. They, looked under the hood a little bit,
Yeah.
and the VCs who knew them knew they would undergo their own due diligence, and that helped get us over the line a little bit.
Very good. Okay. And so the sequencing, this has always sort of been a question of mine. Um, friends and family round or angel round. And then I know there's like series A, B, C,
Hmm.
D, E. I don't know
Yeah,
how many there are, but
it can go on for a while.
it can. But like, who are the different players at those different points in time? And I mean, I sort of know the answer to that, and I sort of don't. You know what I mean? I know in some ways people
Yeah.
often like position themselves as like, hey, we're an angel group or
Hmm.
we're a series A group. And they may be, taking smaller bites for, bigger rewards, whereas like the later ones are like, this is a much more proven concept. But like, how does that all work? Like,
Well, the lines are fluid.
okay,
So a pre-seed investor may define that in the same way that a Series A investor might. And so sometimes how these VCs use different terms is confusing because they're using different words for the same thing. Um, for our round, we raised from one institutional investor, VC. We raised a pre-seed round, and with the another one, we raised a seed round.
okay,
Um, the Had we raised probably about 10 years ago, I think it would have been called a Series A.
okay,
So it's all kind of moved a little bit. And it, to my understanding, so this very well could be wrong, the you you had people wanting to pick winners earlier and earlier and earlier. So if you
okay,
had picked Uber as a Series B company, there was less, you get less pats on your back from other VCs than if you were the pre-seed investor in Uber. The earlier you came in, the better. And so that has actually moved some firms to want to try and find companies before they're even real companies. So there's a lot of pre-seed and seed investors now who only want to be first. And they will come in and they will take a sizable chunk of a company for a nice size check, but nothing like what you would write in a series A, B, C. And they write a lot to a lot more companies, expecting, 1 in 15, 1 in 20 even to fail. But that one becomes Uber and they have made all their money and then some.
yeah,
Um, so for us, we raised in that kind of pre-seed seed space. It's not really a hard line between them.
yeah,
I think once you start talking about 2 to 5 or maybe $3 to $5 million range, that's really your Series A.
okay,
Um, and you're opening up to investors who they're looking for something slightly different. So, when you're raising a seed round, you get grilled as the founder. Who are you? Do you have what it takes to pull through the long nights, run through brick walls, all the, you know,
right,
platitudes? A Series A, they're actually looking at your company financials. And so, have you built a company that they think can be taken to the next level? And that's really what a Series A cash is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you enough scale where you can start making money, or at least on that path.
right,
Um, no startup is expected to be profitable. So unlike your company where, you probably had to make a profit relatively early, no one's expecting a startup to make any money for the first 5, 10 years.
Got it.
Market might change that, but that's a big difference.
Right. Okay. So along the continuum, there's people that are, being part of, each round, let's say,
Hmm.
and is the is the end game in all people's mind, sort of an exit. You got to
Yeah.
sort of quantify it in some way, right? Either, going public or selling it or, just something, right? So
Yeah.
the end result, we don't know exactly how it's going to end, but they want to know how they're able to monetize it, right? And I'm sure they're asking that question on the front end, like, okay, what's your exit strategy, right?
They're not at the seed round stage.
Okay.
In fact, if you as a founder is asking, like, if you're even talking about an exit, it's kind of a red flag. And I'm not sure I truly understand why, but
Mm,
they want you just focused on building it.
yeah.
I think if a VC were here, what he or she would say is that the there's so much growth that has to happen between fundraising and exit that talking about the exit is just like it's 47 steps down the road. It
Right.
doesn't make any sense. And that's partially because their version of an exit is it's going to be different from probably most people's and from the founders, at least initially. So if a VC invests $1 million in a company and it's sold 4 years later and they've doubled their money, that is a massive disappointment.
Mm,
And they're looking to again 15, 20x. And so a 2x return for you and me, maybe that's great.
yeah.
But for them, that is a failure. And they would market as such, and their limited partners would market as such.
Yeah.
So they don't want you to exit. And so maybe you as a founder, if someone came and bought Enclave for $10 million, maybe that's great for me, but my investors would be particularly unhappy.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I've heard that before in VC context, but other contexts as well. Is like the second that somebody's talking about, their exit or something like that,
Hmm.
it's like, uh,
Focus on the work between now and 3 years from now. The exit will happen.
yeah.
If it's bound to happen, it's going to happen on its own.
I think that makes sense though, because
Yeah.
they want somebody that is wanting to get into the middle of the grind, see it through, isn't going to be, deterred, during the challenging times. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur too, and it's just not always going to be great. You know what I mean? And you gotta grind through it and muscle through it.
No, I mean, listen, everyone's got different motivations.
Yeah,
But I think, yeah, they don't want you um, chasing potential exits when there's probably not much there.
yeah,
Like right now, if somebody came and offered to buy Enclave, it'd be great, but it'd be premature for them, not even
yeah,
just us. There's not enough data really out there yet for me to justify what I'd be asking.
yeah,
Um, and so I think everybody knows that. And frankly, we're at a size now where it would be odd to get that offer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think to some degree, I mean, I've thought about this, even for you know my own business, right? The
Hmm.
the trade-off of, uh, if you had capital, right, and you could go further faster, like for me, I know in my heart that we have a big idea, right? And I believe fundamentally, and I tell our team that our vision is to be the leader in this industry. Like
Hmm.
I used to use Goldman Sachs. I said, we want to be the Goldman Sachs of our industry, right?
Yeah.
Nobody gets fired for hiring Goldman Sachs kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
Um, but, when you're talking to your investors and you're talking to them about this idea that you have, like how big is this marketplace? Because when you're talking about it, think about every city, in the US, let alone anywhere else in the world. Like how how does it grow? You know what I mean? Like what's the what's the pathway from, like, okay, Glen Ellen concept to now we make it a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Like
Yeah.
what does that all look like? And then in your mind, what is the magnitude of that total idea in your case?
So a VC will ask that question at least. As how like if Enclave dominated the market and was
Yeah.
the only player and owned all of it, how big is it? My estimate of the U.S. market alone is about 2.2 billion. The European market's the same, plus or minus a little bit. And then depending on where you're talking about in LATAM or Asia, Africa, it begins to move around a bunch.
Yeah.
Um,
2.2 billion revenue or 2.2
yeah,
billion. Well, okay,
yeah.
got it.
So overall revenue, and so in the U.S. and in Europe separately, so four and a half together. The They want that total market size in order to kind of justify the size of their investment.
Yeah,
So they know that you're never going to have quite literally every single town underneath Enclave banner or what name your startup. But it helps them kind of compare and contrast a little bit.
right,
Now, clearly, that's an art, not really a science. Like, how can you kind of estimate that? What they're looking for in the beginning is almost like a business school interview, where they want to hear your thought process, justify
right.
your answer, a little bit less than worried about the actual math, I
Yeah,
think. Um, but for us, then the idea is how do you take this kind of concept and actually build it out? And for us, it's all right, how do you start in Glen Helen, build it out in the Chicago suburbs? How do you pick a second city? Should it be a regional one? Should it be something, totally other side of the country where there is no halo effect? Which one actually makes it more likely where in a year and a half, plus or minus, we can go out and raise a Series A? Assuming everything else works out, which plan gives us the best odds at doing that?
yeah,
And that's, I think, a topic smart people can debate.
yeah,
But it's probably not too dissimilar from yours. Like, where do you want to focus your marketing resources, and do you want to have it where you have staff on the ground, or where it's close by, or do you
yeah,
go after the biggest fish? And what do you do when those diverge? I don't think it's a very different question than probably what you had to face as
right.
for yours.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you kind of positioned it too with the math questions, like they want to know about your process.
Hmm.
It reminded me of like being in college and like I had interviewed with a couple of trading firms and I went
Yeah.
in not knowing like what questions they were going to ask because I don't know, I was just naive or didn't know.
Hmm.
And I remember them being like, how many pennies would it take to reach the ceiling if you stacked them one on top of the other? You know, and there's no right answer, right?
Yeah.
But they want to hear, well, there's probably,
Do you
you know,
just make it
10,
up?
10 pennies in an inch and 12 inches in a foot. And you know what I mean? Like,
So
there you go.
120 times
Yeah,
10 or however
yeah,
tall your ceiling
right.
is. Yeah.
Like they're just looking for, sort of the way you're thinking about it. But I would imagine, even like just within Chicagoland, if you take like the metropolitan area, right? You've probably got, certain, uh, demographics or whatever it is, right? Where you have a pretty good idea that the concept is going to work there. And you're like,
Hmm.
okay, well, how many of those are suburban locations, right, within X number of miles of Chicago, whatever the the secret sauces that you use.
Yeah.
But then if you took all that and you said, okay, well, I think that, it would be mature at whatever, 25 locations across Chicago, right? Well, then you could apply it and say, okay, well, Houston is maybe like, another city that has sort of like a similar thing. So you could start with like, I think it's probably around 25, but like let's
Hmm.
dial into some of those same metrics and that's probably going to inform.
That's exactly the way we actually walk through it. So one of the beginning questions I had was, is it better to show sort of breadth? Like, can we go to more cities and be successful? Fewer locations in each city, but more of them. And it was a resounding no. Go deep in at least one market. So for
Yeah,
us, clearly Chicago, and show that you can have 25, 30. Because any VC can say, if you got 25, 30 in Chicago, applying it to Houston, Phoenix, that's easy. Okay, fine. But if you just cherry pick two locations in Chicago, how do we know you're not just cherry picking and that's the extent of the market?
yeah,
So part of my job now is, again, you're still constantly proving out market size, and that's still part of this game, is how do you build a business that is successful while proving it's big enough to convince somebody to write me a seven-figure check in a year and a half.
right. Makes sense. Along the way so far, what are some of the, surprises or like what are some of the wins, like things that happen that you didn't expect to happen? Um, and maybe what are some of the challenges that you didn't expect to happen that,
Yeah.
you know,
I'll do the second one first, just because it's top of mind. And I think everyone I've ever talked to says hiring is the hardest thing to do
yeah,
when you're leading a company, and I never gave it any credit. And it's absolutely the hardest thing to do. Um, and we've struggled with it. And maybe that's the market. I know it's hard to hire now
Right.
across the board, but we're at a venture-backed startup. We're doing fun stuff. It's a good team. I thought in my mind finding good people would be easier.
Hmm.
That has been the biggest challenge. The I think the second one is just kind of how you do it with family. Um, Being an entrepreneur, I love your thoughts on this one, but with spouse, kids is tough because the business doesn't respect sort of work hours.
Yep.
Things happen all the time, and in my business, it could be anything from a toilet backing up to someone falling asleep on one of the couches to I don't know a landlord wanting to talk at 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday when my kid's at swim class.
Yep.
Um, so it's juggling that with family. Like I found myself like I'm hiding sometimes. I got to take the dog for a walk and like doing a call on the walk. And I mean everyone knows what I'm doing. I'm not really hiding it, but
Right.
I can pretend. I can lie to myself. Um, so I don't know how you manage that.
I mean, I'm lucky to just, have a great
Yeah,
partner in my business with my wife,
yeah,
she's been, encouraging and understanding and
yeah,
whatever since the beginning. Um, she's the person that, we talk over dinner and how's things going, really kind of conversations,
yeah.
So whether or not she's on the payroll, which she's not, uh, she's a great sounding board for me. And, we do our best to, I think, knowing that those things are just going to be part of the equation, we also try to
Yeah.
like manage through that too. So, if I'm in the middle of a day and I've got a gap in my schedule and I need to go, pick the kids up or, do something, it's fine. There's trade-offs,
That's
right?
how we do it a little. Yeah, my wife and I, that's how we kind of do it too. Is
Yeah.
like I can sort of be the master of my own schedule at times, and so we'll take advantage. Um, but it's more, I think it's more my guilt complex with kids.
Yeah.
That's because it takes you away more than I think I was expecting it to.
Yeah.
So like that's that I think is the bigger, harder part.
Got it.
Um, I forgot you asked another question, and I've
Oh, just surprise. I said surprises, wins, or hardships, or
Wins. I mean, for me, the wins have actually been kind of the response from customers and
yeah.
members. Um, we have at this point 5 locations, another 3 or 4 under construction, um, and the response has actually just been really good. Like it makes me feel like we're actually onto something when you hear from our customers that this is exactly what they need and how thankful they are that we're there. And like, well, we love you too. Like you're the ones paying us. Thanks for the feedback, but it's been overwhelmingly positive.
Yep.
Um, and that's been big. I think that I don't think we would have raised the VC round without kind of testimonials from members, some of
Hmm.
whom had invested in Enclave. Um, but it was those testimonials that I think really pushed our VCs because we don't have a pure tech company.
Yeah.
It's tech enabled, but it's not pure tech in that traditional software platform way. And for a lot of VCs, that's a red flag. Not a deal breaker, but something they need to look at critically. And if it weren't for our members, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that it's tech enabled because one of the things that I was going to say as an encouragement to you and as a Enclave member, uh, I think one of the cool things that's kind of come about with it is there's like a cultural thing.
Hmm.
And I think that there's sort of an embedded high accountability, low control type of thing where, you know, everybody has the ability to enter
Yeah,
when they want to. You know what I mean? And everybody's sort of expected if they want to go get, a Coke out of the fridge, go get a Coke out of the fridge, or go get some pretzels, whatever. But, kind of take care of the place, clean up after
yeah,
yourself. You know what I mean? Start the dishwasher if you're the last person in there at night, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like there's been a culture that's been established that's been really good.
yeah.
And even to the point, and you probably laugh about this, but like I still remember going in there. I think I was probably one of the very early
I
members.
think so. Yeah,
And I remember another friend of mine was one of the first ones too, and he showed me the lockers, and he's just like, "Yeah, just throw whatever in your locker." And then he's like, "Yeah, there you go." And I'm like, "Well, don't I need to lock it?" And he's like, you know, kind of shrugged it off, and
yeah,
he's like, whatever. But the unintended consequence of that was just like, no, this is a friendly place. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think
mhm,
anybody probably has ever taken me up on it, but if they wanted to,
I
go
have.
borrow something from my locker, they could. You know what I mean?
Um, yeah, no, I think that's been a the building the culture of the Enclave, I think is something I like within Enclave, within members, not our corporate culture, but
Yeah,
I don't know if that was as much that was more of an accident than it was purposeful. So one of my co-founders, Dan, I think actually just did it naturally. And
yeah,
he actually helped to build culture at our different locations. And you can see it in that there are some locations, Glen Ellen or Arlington Heights location, where he invested a lot of time
yeah,
and he knows the members, they know him. And there is a sort of, yeah, that friendly camaraderie that keeps people coming back. Some of our other locations, he didn't invest the time and he was doing other stuff. It wasn't,
yeah,
miss, but and you see it, and you see it in the business metrics actually. Sort of churn is a little higher at those locations, and so it's become a very important part of our business model. I don't think we've cracked the code on it quite yet, but
yeah,
it's becoming more and more important. And how do you build it? Because we don't without staff, you've got to there still has to be something.
yeah,
So we're working through that.
yeah. Um, yeah, really interesting. Love it.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So we've hit a lot on the second topic, which is, sort of your model, um, but also kind of in combination with this bigger thing, which is, pre-COVID, post-COVID,
Hmm.
this shift in dynamic on how people work and where they work and whatever. And obviously, you have, you know, a very strong view on it. Now, you started this when relative
Pre-COVID.
pre-COVID, so it's interesting,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you started it pre-COVID. I mean, what is your current perspective, your current view on, what the future holds for office space, people kind of being in offices?
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be much of a shock. So before COVID, 40% of white collar professionals worked from home 1 day a week, which is a pretty big market size when you do the math. And we felt it was enough to justify opening up a location in Glen Ellen. And we actually the success we met with, so we opened the doors January 1st, 2020. I think we signed up our first member maybe December 27th, 2019. Um, so we were open for about 2.5 months before COVID shut everything down. And it was rapidly successful. I think we were at 60% capacity in the first 2 months, which
Mm,
is extremely fast. Um, and when COVID hit, clearly we got shut down and everybody stayed home and things were chaotic for a while. But now the numbers have changed a little bit. Now it's not 40% of people working from home, it's 80. And they're not working from home 1 day a week, they're working home 2 to 3. Three is actually the average. And so the market size here has grown exponentially,
hmm
if you will. Um, and so I don't think that's going anywhere. I think you see a lot of companies, Allstate's a good example, that are just closing offices. They're just jettisoning their real estate costs and telling people they can work from home. They might cover as a benefit the cost of a co-working space, which
hmm
clearly I love. Um, and they are moving past it. I mean, there's an article every other week. I mean, I think the New York Times had something over the weekend about how corporate office spaces, they're keeping the space, but they're reducing the footprint. So, net amount of sort of corporate office in downtown Chicago or downtown major American cities is going to be a lot less over the next 10, 15, 20 years than it was in the preceding decade. So I don't think hybrid work is going anywhere. Certainly, companies want people to go back to the office. They're having an extraordinarily hard time doing it, one, enforcing it, current employees. If they are really enforcing it, they're having a hard time recruiting. And I think you're going to see a lot of people saying, I can do 87% of my job from a laptop. Why do I need to go to the office to just not talk to anybody? And especially as I would say the world, but and maybe just the US moves more into this kind of what is work-life balance. For a lot of people, they want to work, and not just women, a lot of people want to work close to where their kids are at school so they can pick them up, walk them to home. And even if they sign back in later for another few hours, why are they wasting an hour in the car to go downtown? I think if suburbs are going to continue to exist, remote work or hybrid work is going to stay the norm. Um, The infrastructure in this country, though, was not built to match.
Mm.
So the infrastructure in this country was built to funnel people from the suburbs on highways into the urban core where they would work 9 hour, 8, 9 hour days and then go home. And so now we're playing catch up as a country a little bit. Um, and so that's, I hope where Enclave can play a role is kind of bringing that work infrastructure out to the suburbs, wherein, maybe we have a contract with Allstate one day and their employees can come in and out. We cater to people when they're working from home 2, 3 days a week. They don't want to work at home. They want the change of scenery. They want to get away from kids. They want to build a work community, but they don't need to travel for an hour to get it.
Yep, absolutely. And we've touched a little bit on, your model as relates to like where, right, suburban
Hmm.
locations. You mentioned the size, but it might be helpful for anybody listening in, or even for me, who knows more about it than somebody that's just hearing about it for the first time, to know about, like, how does your concept look different than, say, a WeWork, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe there's some other alternative that's out there. Like, I think there's apps that, like, you can rent a spot at like a restaurant or something like
Yeah.
that, or like, I've heard of different things like that. But what is it? What is your secret sauce, right? As a if
Hmm.
you want to disclose it, what is your secret sauce, and how do you feel like it's unique and better than other alternatives?
I will disclose parts of it. A lot of it, if you walk by, becomes somewhat, I think, a little bit obvious.
Yeah.
The back end systems are what's complicated to build. Um, but so the Enclave is built for that suburban work from home environment. So to illustrate, co-working in the cities, 90% of co-working in this country is primarily built to be an office hub for large corporate clients. So we work, culturally, they talk about the entrepreneur and bringing these people in, but they make their money. I think 80% of their revenue is from corporate contracts, renting a whole floor again to Microsoft or Uber or some big, big companies.
Hmm.
Um, Same with Regis and Industrious, which are the two other big players in this space. So they'll take out 50 to 100,000 square feet on average, turn it into a sort of flex office space for the company to continue to have an office hub. In the suburbs, you don't have the density from any one employer. So you're not looking to build an office hub. What you're looking to build is somewhere where an individual can go and continue to be the most productive version of themselves. So they can go and get away from the distractions of home. When I'm at home, I have trouble turning off Netflix. It goes on at some point when I have a break, or I'll be working with it on in the background, and the next thing I know, I'm lying down on the couch, the computer's 12 feet away, and I'm watching the 12th episode.
Right.
So for people want to get away from that. They want to get sort of a more community feel. Um, but they're not looking for that office hub. It's not the density of employers. So usually that means one, they're paying for it themselves. And they don't need all the bells and whistles, HR stuff that comes with kind of an office hub. So they literally just looking for a space. So by our spaces are tech enabled. There is no staff at any Enclave. They're much smaller, we're on average about 2,000 square feet. We actually have a new model that's different from the one in Glen Ellen, which is kind of the front third of it, if you will, is kind of the open lounge. And then the back 2/3 are a combination of conference rooms and offices.
Hmm.
And then we have two membership tiers. One gives you access to the open space, and one gives you access to the open space and any of the offices. It's not a dedicated office. It's not for you to
Right.
hang pictures of your kids, but you can go in and use it. Um, and so depending on your needs, if you're a lawyer, you've got depositions you're doing over Zoom, you're going to want that upgraded membership because you can close the door. You're ad executive, and you can talk out in the open, or you only need it 1, 2 days a week. You pay that much lower, $100 a month, and you can use the space.
Yeah.
Um, so people are looking to kind of have, what Howard Schultz calls the third space. It's something that augments their life. It's an extension, not of their office. They're looking for an extension of their living room. And I think that distinction underlies a lot of kind of what we're building at Enclave.
Yep.
But we use tech to make sure that costs are down, to make sure it's always affordable for everybody. which, the more affordable we are, the lower our churn is, the less we spend on marketing. So there's a lot of reasons to build it that way.
Yep.
And then our play is scale. If there was real estate I liked in Wheaton, I'd put one in Wheaton.
Yep.
And so the way we've designed it is we should be able to be in quite literally every community across the country. We'll probably start with 2025 in Chicago, but that's the idea.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, people often ask me if they've never been in there um, to describe it, and they're like, "Was it kind of like WeWork?" And I'm like, "No." And I don't. I think I've been in maybe one WeWork,
Hmm.
but it was downtown. It was an office
A
space.
lot of offices, yeah.
It was yeah, it was just officey, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, it's not that, and it's not Soho House, where it's music and
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. But it's nice. I like how you said it's an extension of your living room. You know what I mean? There's nice furniture,
Hmm.
comfortable spaces, kind of thing. But um, I think that, and well, we didn't really hit on this too, but it's co-working plus the social aspect is probably a
Hmm.
little bit different. But like, how is that played off? Maybe describe that in case I just,
Yeah, the social aspect is we've actually again tweaked that a little bit.
yeah,
So all the enclaves are BYOB. There's a locker where you can put your favorite drinks, and you can invite a guest or two after work hours to kind of enjoy a drink. Or if you're, it seems, a real estate agent, you can invite a client during the day. But so you can use it for that lounge. When we were building the Glen Ellen location, the logic was simply, people aren't two dimensional. They don't go home and they don't go to work. They are all of these things plus social animals all at the same time. And so how can we build a space that kind of adds to your life as a member and really gives you increased value?
yeah,
And so by giving this sort of BYOB bar element inside the enclave, it it sort of adds a little bit more for our members. It helps with retention and all those things, but it really it's recognition of kind of the multi-dimensional aspect of our members, of people in general.
yeah,
They want to be more than just employees. They want to be more than just parents or whoever lives at home. They are really looking for, a space where they could be themselves and do a lot of different things.
yeah.
So we provide that. I think some people like the exclusive nature. Like we cap our membership,
Hmm.
and so it's not exclusive in kind of a look down your nose kind of way, but just there's only so much space, and I think people kind of like that limited nature. They know who they're going to see when they're there. It's smaller groups. It's always accessible,
Yeah.
so they appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you think the mix of co-working versus social was going to be when you started it? And then what do you feel like it is now?
We thought it was going to be primarily social.
Okay.
So when you look at Enclave Glen Ellen, we thought that was going to be a very social space, and we built it accordingly. I would have said it was 60-40, 60 social, 40 work. It's probably about 75 work, 25 social at this point.
Got it.
Um, and I think some of that is COVID, and that's partly why we're building out this new model,
Yeah.
um, and letting people kind of have a sort of, it's more conducive for work, I would say. The social is now smaller groups. Our new locations couldn't host a 50-person party.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, just circling back to your comments about people utilizing it for both, though, the nice thing is, getting back to the whole model is it is intended to be community based.
Hmm.
People aren't traveling 15 miles, right, to go to this co-working
Mm-mm.
space. I mean, you probably have the data, but the percentage of your members that live in that community is probably
It's close to 100.
yeah,
This is actually the strange thing, and I see this in myself, and so I can't explain it. But when you live in a city, traveling to a different neighborhood, you jump in an Uber, 25 minutes later, you're there. Nobody really shrugs. They just do it. Like you're going to meet a friend at a bar 25 minutes away, you get an Uber, you're there, you take the train, whatever. Here in the suburbs, there's a block. You don't want to cross
yeah,
municipal lines.
yep,
So I live 7 minutes away from Hinsdale. I can count on one hand how many times I've been to Hinsdale.
yeah,
And it there's no reason, but you just don't, there's something about that block. You kind of go to your local downtown and that's where you want to be. So almost all of our members come from that local town. It's why I think we could be successful in Wheaton, just because you don't pull across boundaries like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense, but I see it in myself. So I'm sure you can name 40
Oh,
people just like that.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just part of it, but I don't know. I think that that's why it works, and I think that's why I believe in the concept of what you're doing, um, and the potential scale of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So where are you at now? You said you have how many
So
locations?
5 locations open, four at some stage of construction. And the idea would be to open up about 15 in the area and then look for a second city. Still building in Chicago, adding some, but look for a second city at that point. So hopefully middle of next year, start opening some in wherever that second town might be.
Yeah. And what was the time period that you said that, to get, say, 15 stood up?
I think it'll be, my guess is about summer next year to have 15. It might be a bit aggressive, but that's the goal.
Okay. All right. That works. Um, what are your other thoughts on just, you know, officing slash culture? I mean, obviously you have one side of it, but you've also worked for large
Hmm.
organizations. Sounds like you were remote when you were doing that.
For a time, yeah.
What I've talked about on the podcast before is that it seems like people tend to be like they want it all in person or all remote, and there's no grounds for in between, right?
Hmm.
And I just think that a lot of people have been like, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it because that's the way I believe it has to be, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I've been talking about this, but I think that the truth is definitely somewhere in between. I don't think that people cannot be dismissive of remote work. I mean,
Hmm.
it's here to stay. I think that the conversation really needs to be around how do you still build chemistry culture within an
Yeah.
organization while embracing that, right? That's
Hmm.
the better conversation, I think. But as you've had conversations with investors or um, you know just in your experiences doing what you're doing, obviously you have a view, right? But what are your just overall thoughts stepping away
I
from
mean, I don't think employers can be rigid in this. I think if they demand 5 days a week in an office, you're going to have a very hard time recruiting talent.
it? Yeah.
And I've seen that. Admittedly, it's anecdotal in my own network, but I've seen people leave jobs or decide they didn't want to pursue an opportunity because it was a must be 5 days a week inside. And it's just turning a lot of folks off.
Yeah.
I think that the move to 100% remote, the all-state version, is also going to be equally as unlikely because it's so hard to build that team chemistry.
Right.
One of the things I like about the Enclave social network is that you can actually, or social component, is you can actually host these events for your team at Enclave. And so as we start looking at sort of corporate partnerships, that's one of the things we'll be offering is though, if you sign some sort of corporate deal, part of it is going to be you can host your event, you can build your networking, you can do your Monday morning huddles in person. That's going to be part of the offer. And I think that's going to be really important for companies.
Hmm.
You can't lose that culture. And there are some things that I think, yeah, have to be done in person. Um, and that's part of where I think the future of remote work is going is kind of this. It's not going to be, oh, I belong to a co-working space in Glen Ellen and I work there 5 days a week. My hope is that they always work at enclaves, but it might be Arlington Heights a few days a week. It might be Downers Grove. It might be Glen Ellen. And it's going to be with different teams as schedules permit. You got to do something in the afternoon with family, you have a doctor's appointment, you work local, or else you go somewhere else where you have your team or your boss or they come to you. So it's going to be a mix. And I think the best companies, the companies that care most about recruiting top tier talent, are going to find ways to solve that for employees,
Hmm.
or they're going to trust their employees to figure it out for themselves in a real way. I think companies that over police it are going to have a problem.
Yeah.
For one, it's just not really enforceable. You're relying too much on mid-level management, most of whom want to work from home anyway. And two, it's also just a lot cheaper. Allstate Insurance buying memberships at Enclave for every single one of their employees is maybe 2% of the real estate cost that they just gave up.
Right.
That's back of the envelope math right here. It might even be more. And so, there's the savings that they would get from it versus, the sort of retention benefits, the happier employees on the other end. To me, it's a no-brainer. To a lot of HR departments, it's a no-brainer. We'll see. If
Yeah.
there's a big recession, the power dynamic between employees and employers might change. We'll see how it goes, but I think it's going to be hard to move back to the office.
Yeah. I don't disagree. So, I mean, huge idea, starting small, getting some venture backing. The world is in some ways, your oyster, yours for the taking. What's the
Mhm.
biggest threat to that in your mind?
Um, I not moving fast enough.
Yeah.
I don't think the threat is from competition. At this point, and we're still a very small company, so this says more about the market, but I think we are the biggest suburban coworking company in the Chicago area in terms of number of locations, I think already.
Yeah.
Um, so, I think building these spaces and coming up with the playbook to do it is really, really hard, and getting the right team in place is really hard. And I think we're onto something, but the pressure is still internal.
Yeah.
Can we build fast enough? Can we build them um, sort of, I would say, well enough? That's not really the right way to put it, but can we create sort of a dynamic with our customers that shows that they really, really love the product?
Hmm.
Um, and then can we do it all on the budget the VCs want us to do it on? It's the big X factor. And so I think that to me is the biggest thing. I wake up in the middle of the night worried about us and the team and hitting our own metrics. I don't worry about external factors too much.
Right.
Um, so we'll see. Back
Yeah.
that leads back to the hiring conversation.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I mean, what kind of positions are, when you say hiring, what kind of positions?
if you know someone who is a great at marketing, so
Okay.
marketing and sales, it's a little bit of, in our business, is a little bit of both. How do you get leads? How do you close leads? Um, that's the hardest thing to
Meaning
find.
like guiding the members, like somebody wants to come check it out kind of thing,
Well,
or like
yeah, but
more like external.
everything from Facebook ads to generate the leads
Hmm.
to events to making members happy so they stay longer and don't churn, to yes, giving tours, all of it. I think that's in finding people who I think are good on their feet.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you're looking for problem solvers. Like
Yeah.
we are the very definition of building the plane as we fly it.
Yeah.
And you just need people who can think on their feet and want to build. And that's the biggest asset someone can bring. They really want to build. It's not motivated by money. Like clearly, there's like everybody at startups is in some ways motivated by money, and there's an equity component to it, and everyone knows the stories of the janitor at Google that walked away with millions of dollars.
Right.
But the wanting to be a part of that building process, that's the hardest part to find.
Yeah. I I get it. Yeah. You're not alone, I would say, but I think that there is probably a different dynamic too with working for a startup. On
Hmm.
one hand, it, excites a certain person, and on the other hand, it terrifies, another, and
Yeah,
you're trying to find that person that's excited about it, in a difficult market. But
it's funny.
I think it's what I found historically, at least with my business slash for the clients that we work with, is that you can go through the exercise and, interviewing, thinking you got the right person,
Hmm.
them not coming on or them coming on and then leaving later or whatever. And like, I always just try to remind myself when those things happen, um, that, it's for the best for the organization,
Yeah,
because if somebody doesn't want to be there, you know what I mean? That's like one of the worst things that you
best to
can
find out
do.
quickly.
Yeah.
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 But to me, it's funny though. Like I don't think working for a startup is risky.
Yeah.
I mean, the startup who go under, if you're looking for 20 years of employment, that risk I get. But you you go into a startup, nowadays you make pretty much what you would make anywhere else. Like market rates are market rates.
Right.
You also get this equity, which you don't get at a Fortune 100. Um, but more than that, you get incredible story, incredible line on your resume.
Yep.
So even if it fails in 2 years, you as a relatively young person can describe yourself honestly as the head of marketing for a venture-backed company or the head of or whatever, the head of the Chicago region for, a startup. And it's a level of experience that you wouldn't get anywhere else. It's a line on a resume that would take you a decade to get. It could help leapfrog careers. Maybe I'm, you know, half glass full, but it doesn't, to me, the personal risk is minimal, except for that, yes, the company might not exist in 2 years. And I get that, but a lot can happen in 2 years at any company. So
Right.
maybe I
You're
discount it.
probably more likely to attract somebody in that position that's going to be comfortable uh, and in secure, right? Like the way you're
And
just,
that's the problem with startups.
yeah,
It's not the most diverse ecosystem for that
yeah,
that particular reason, and you've got a lot of pushback, and so I think VC world has to figure that part out because it's a valid criticism.
yeah. All right, very good. Well, this has been extraordinarily informative. Exactly what I would have hoped in terms of, just getting our arms around the venture capital component, but also onto just what is front of mind for a lot of people. You know what I mean? Any employer, a lot of employees, it's just what's the mix of, working from home or this third space concept versus being on there. So, yeah, um, very grateful for you being here. We do have
Yes.
final three questions, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
why am I worried about these
yeah,
final three
you
questions? You did not warn me about these final three questions.
um, they'll be fine. Don't worry about it. They're just for fun. Besides, the first question is besides this podcast, any favorite podcast that you have? And if you're
Um,
not a Potter, I'm okay.
I listened to a few, and of course now I'm blanking out on the guy's name, but he does long form interviews like this one, Lex
Friedman.
Friedman.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'll listen to, he gets a lot of really great guests that talk about, physics and religion,
yeah,
professor at, MIT or something. So I've thoroughly enjoyed a lot of those.
yeah.
But other than that, I need to expand my podcast game a little bit.
There you go. There you go. Well, that's good enough one. I have not actually tuned into that one, but I've heard of him. So
There's a couple that I will happily recommend you.
very cool. Okay, best concert you've ever been to?
Best concert I've ever been to, Zach Brown. Actually, no. It was so my wife and I go down to this little concert in or little town just outside Nashville called Leapers Fork.
Okay,
No stoplights, 2 blocks, one music venue. Um, and we ended up randomly going there on a New Year's Eve for the first time. And it was studio musicians from big country music bands, 12 of them, that played for 5 hours one New Year's Eve. There's probably about 50 people in in this little music venue.
wow.
So that was awesome. But I'm a big country music fan, so pretty much anything in and out of Nashville or different parts of Texas.
But you were talking my language with Zach Brown. So what was your Zach Brown?
That was also in Nashville. We
Mm,
went, I think that was our first like post-COVID experience, if you will.
okay,
And so we went down to see a show in the Ice Arena, right in the middle of Nashville.
got it.
And just had, you're meeting strangers, and like just randomly talking to people, singing at the top of your lungs. It's a good
Yeah,
show.
yeah. My wife is a huge country music fan. I'm
Yeah.
I'm not. And years and years ago, she came home one day and she was like, "Hey, there's this guy that I think you should listen to this
Yeah.
song." And she's like, "I think you're gonna like it." I'm like, "Ah, I'm not I don't, I don't like country." She's like, "No, this guy's different." And it was Chicken Fried with Zach Brown, and I'm like, I was immediately all in. Like,
Yeah.
downloaded the album immediately. We went to a concert. I remember we went down to Peoria,
Hmm.
and he was gonna play at like the what is it, Chillicothe or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
a suburb next to Peoria,
Hmm.
like the fairgrounds or something like that. And something happened. I think it rained or something happened where they shifted it inside the like Peoria Civic Center. It was just like this little tiny group of people. But yeah, I've been a Zach enthusiast for a long time.
They put
So
on a good live show.
they do
Yeah.
excellent musicians.
Yeah.
Um, okay, last question is a place that you've been that everybody should visit once.
So I lived overseas for a long time, so
Okay,
my answer here is weird. But there's an island off of Tanzania, right out. You take a ferry from Dar es Salaam called Zanzibar.
Ah, okay.
which is awesome. And it's where Freddie Mercury was born.
Okay.
Um, so that's its claim to fame. But it's just like one of those idyllic little islands where you land and there's this, you land off, get off the ferry. There's all these sort of bars, restaurants in the main town. But then the middle of the island is rainforests. The far end of the island is like deserted beaches and kind of giant turtles that are just wandering around the beaches, dolphins swimming off. It was just it's a special, special place.
Okay.
There's also a place I went to when I was 19. I'm fairly certain I'll never get back. It's a
Yeah.
little far, but yeah, it was
Well, hey, you never
a hell of
know.
a trip.
When you're a big deal, venture capital backed, founder of this gigantic firm called
You know,
Enclave, we
exactly.
can make
So
that happen.
I'm still waiting for you to invite me out there, actually, is what it is. So, but no, if you can make it all the way out there, I don't think there's a world where my wife ever wants to go, but
Yeah,
I'd love to go back one of these days.
very good. Well, Bobby Kellman, co-founder of Enclave, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Loved every minute of it. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Be well.